So in addition to the reduction of data prices, the Competition Commission also announced 3 important internet as a human right measures. We'll get to those in just a moment. We talk now to Avani Singh, who is director at ALT Advisories or Alt Advisories, to talk a little bit more about this. So Avani, let me start with, when we talk about internet as a human right, is it really a right in itself, or is it a function or an enabler of a human right or access to human rights?
So we'd like to talk about it as an enabler of the full array of fundamental rights. Rights are something that are intrinsic and inherent to every person. But access to the internet has now become so essential to the way in which we communicate, the way in which we access government services, the way in which we do almost all of our daily activities, that actually this is really quite a crucial key enabler, and so much so that both the United Nations and the African Commission on Human Rights have held that the rights that we enjoy offline, we enjoy equally and apply equally online as well.
So basically, and I think the UN says about 7.7 billion people around the world don't have access to internet, and we're saying, according to what you say in your belief of internet as a human right, that they are shut out of modern life as a result of not having access to that bandwidth.
Absolutely. So the International Telecommunications Union estimates that approximately half the world's population remain offline. And for those people who are online, there's still the challenge of not having meaningful and effective access because of other barriers, such as high cost of data, infrastructure challenges, and so on. So for those people, whether or not you're offline entirely or whether or not you have compromised access to the internet, your inability to fully exercise and realize your fundamental rights are seriously jeopardized.
So what are we talking about, those particular? Is it down to development? Are we talking about freedom of expression? Are we talking about freedom of association and gathering?
It comprises, I think, the full spectrum of rights. Again, the ITU has held that almost no right is completely separated from access to the internet. So the most obvious right, I suppose, are the triad of information rights: access to information, freedom of expression, and the right to privacy, which are all in some ways exercised by access to the internet. But it goes much further than that. For job seekers, for example, seeking to find out more about the workplace, the right to work is compromised. People wanting to find out about their health, the right to health is compromised. Just the ability to participate effectively in the digital economy depends fundamentally on our ability to access the internet.
And I know it's still very academic when we still go back to whether or not it's a right or an enabler, but there are those who argue that if we're talking about freedom of justice, for instance, as you talk about health, education, job opportunities, having the internet doesn't necessarily guarantee them those rights.
It doesn't guarantee it, but it takes us so much further, and I think that's what's essential to it. It's such a stumbling block, and in fact a patent impediment when you don't have that access, that I think to call it academic is almost problematic for those naysayers who say, well, it's just a form of technology. It's become so much more than that and is so central to everyday life that I think it's imperative for everyone to have access.
And I'm sure you'd agree, because critics also argue that it actually can also cause more harm than good. If we look at corruption, if we look at the wide scale of security theft and hacking schemes that we've seen.
I agree with you fully there. And I think part of the 7-point plan that organizations that we've worked with, like Media Monitoring Africa and South African National Editors Forum, have developed, have included as part of the 7-point plan the importance of digital literacy, so that when people are online, which is the first step of it, people are safe once they are online. And that comprises really 2 elements. One, making sure that the network is safe so that it's not jeopardized or compromised by attacks and hacking and so on. And second, that people are aware and astute about the way in which they engage online and don't violate the rights of others, and are also aware when their own rights are violated.
So let's talk about some of the Competition Commission's recommendations in its report, especially on data. We've been talking about data prices, how data must fall, but then they are also suggesting, for instance, a lifeline package of daily free data for all prepaid packages. How would that work?
I think that's a really exciting recommendation, and again mirrors one of the recommendations that was contained in the 7-point plan. It's not clear at this stage how it will work in practice. For example, what it provides is that for all prepaid subscribers, all operators will have to engage with the Competition Commission and come up with a solution within 3 months, which will then have to be entrenched within some sort of regulatory framework. It's hoped that the Competition Commission will call for public submissions on this, so that those persons who are most directly affected by this can also engage and make sure that the solution that's come up with is practical and is most effective to realize.
I mean, I was thinking about the SABC whom we had in the studio to speak about gender-based violence recently, and I'd imagine in situations where you are in danger, having access to a panic button or alarm on your phone, which you can press to raise alarm, so to speak, to say that you're in danger. Surely we shouldn't have data to be able to do that.
And that really links to one of the other recommendations contained in the report as well, which is around zero rating of certain government or public benefit services or educational institutions. And I think that's another important recommendation that's been made, because that recognizes that there's certain types of information in the public interest where the operators should be the ones who carry the cost, not the users, because of how essential those services are.
But when we talk about zero rating content for public benefit organizations and educational institutions, then you would also have to narrow it down to the kind of content that would be commensurate with that recommendation.
Absolutely. And that's going to be interesting, again, to see how the Competition Commission approaches this. So again, like with the previous recommendation, part of what's required is for the operators to engage with the Competition Commission for over the next 3-month period, and then to entrench that within a regulatory framework and recognize the need to update that going forward.
Low income areas, how would they best benefit from this? I mean, we've seen, I remember when the city of Tshwane was trying it out, free Wi-Fi zones. I think it should be standard, shouldn't it be? If you're saying you're looking at improving delivery of services, if we're looking to improve education levels and job opportunities for the youth and tackling that issues of unemployment.
Yeah, so one of the other interesting recommendations that's been made is an intermediate recommendation about alternative infrastructure. And that comes down to issues like free public Wi-Fi, community networks. I think those are really exciting initiatives, but what the Competition Commission recognizes is that the current models are not scalable. We need to look beyond the metropolitan areas and also think about how we can address this trend towards being quite anti-poor and discriminating against lower income users, and extend beyond to municipalities in rural and peri-urban areas, where it's also equally important for people to be able to access the internet.
And the biggest hindrance, I'd imagine, is the fact that we're still lagging behind analog to digital transformation, still not realizable as yet.
Exactly. And so the digital migration has been unacceptably slow, I think. And that's one of the steps that the Department of Telecommunications has recognized, and the need to allocate increased spectrum. But that's not the complete answer. I think we can blame the department to some extent, but I think the mobile operators also need to accept responsibility for their pricing measures. And I think now is a really key opportunity for different stakeholders to come to the fore and really kind of own this role to make sure that this unacceptable situation is remedied going forward.
All right, thank you very much for speaking to us, Avani Singh of ALT or ALT Advisories, and that's where we're going to end up for now. Let's take you back to Aldrin for a recap of the headlines.